So you're telling me there's a party in Germany who's silencing their opposition and has a secret service, an SS, that is spying on their opposition and silencing them? I mean, come on, history rhyming here? Are they not looking in the mirror?
Blocking rights, restricting people, restricting free speech, all in the name of stopping fascism. As a free speech podcast, sounds kind of like fascism.
This is something I don't think most people want to even believe is happening or just want to dismiss it. One, because most people probably don't know their history very well. But two, because it's an uncomfortable thing to identify. We're looking at all these data points. We're looking at this current events that rhyme almost exactly with history. And it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. In this podcast, we dive into the world of investing, geopolitics, entrepreneurship, and adventure. My name's Austin Bronner. I'm here with my co-host, Cody Shirk, in South Florida. Cody, how are you doing today?
I'm good. We were just talking about sunlight before we started recording. And I know you're in Oregon and the sun's starting to come out. So are you getting more vitamin D exposure?
Full sunshine right now. It's wonderful. We get a glorious. It's between 72 and 83 every day for the next 10 days. No, we were talking about sunlight because I was in LA on Monday, and I saw at the airport Scientific American breaking news. Sunlight helps heal your body. Apparently, they're finally realizing that, some exposure to sun and UV rays and different spectrums of light can actually help you heal, which anybody who's been in the health space or followed the health space for years has already known. But now it's official because Scientific American has picked it up and proven it.
So you're telling me, after thousands of years of human evolution, that somehow our bodies evolved to want and need sunlight? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah,
crazy, right?
Shocking,
wow.
Being in a hospital where you don't receive any sunlight, you just receive horrible overhead light that may have a negative impact on your ability to heal. So, breaking news for anybody who follows Scientific American. They're finally catching up.
Have you heard about that thing where you are supposed to get sunlight in the areas of your body that never gets sunlight?
Oh yeah, perineum sunning.
Yeah,
they're the ones that are most validated by this. They're the most validated by this whole thing. That actually there's some truth, and that people getting sunning their perineum have been the ones that are right. And
the upside of that is there's some health benefits to getting sun on the area, but the downside of that is you have a high likelihood of being required to register as a sexual offender.
No, the actual upside is that if you are really committed to it, you have to move to a place where you have your own backyard, you have enough space to do it, and that probably in itself will get you away from enough people to be healthier.
So go back to nature, get on your 100 acres of land and get your perineum, or is that what you call it?
Perineum.
The gooch. Get your gooch
perineum,
some sunlight.
The butthole sunning. That's what it's all about.
Okay. All right. Sweet.
Well, we are going to dive into a bunch of stuff today. Not going to be fully a perineum sunning podcast, but what we are going to dive into is some interesting geopolitics and kind of, I don't know if this is the inspiration for this episode. I was reading an article earlier this week about some of the kind of politics and changes in Germany and what's going on over there. I texted over to you, and then we are kind of coming forward with a podcast about what.
I mean, this is totally the inspiration of it. You sending me that article. Give us a rundown of the article it is, and then we're going to dive into it.
So it's very interesting. We're at this time right now where in our own country, we have a lot of people on both sides talking about threats to democracy, right? And we need to stop Trump because he's a threat to democracy. Or if you're more of a right winger, you've got people on the left who are trying to stop democracy. There's threats to democracy everywhere. And it's interesting because I was reading this article that was paralleling what's happening in Germany. And if you don't know the situation in Germany, there is a right wingish party called the AfD. That's the Alternative for Deutschland, and they received about 20% of the vote in the last election, which is higher than, the once dominant Social Democratic Party and the Green Party, these parties that typically have been kind of dominant in Germany. So this Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, is a pro-free market, anti-EU, anti-mass migration party. They place second in Germany's recent parliamentary elections. They
I
got
think it's
about
important
21%.
to articulate though is 20%, but it's second. So it's not left or
It's
right
second.
politics in the US
No,
where it's like 50-50. It's they received 20% of the vote, but that was in second place to the party that won that was at what, 26%?
28%. So
28%. So
think
close,
about
very
that,
close.
right? 28%, 21%, and then you've got 16% that went to the Social Democratic Party, and then 11% which went to the Green Party. So it's, it is a election that was, many people are voting for different groups, but again, they were the second vote getter. And um, by this kind of long-standing tradition, they should have been allotted a committee chairmanship and vice chairmanships based on their vote share. But what instead happened is that they are getting banned from taking over parts of the government under this idea or threat to democracy idea that they're basically too far right, and as they're a threat because they're quote fascist, so they're a threat to democracy, so they're not actually being represented in government the way that they should be based on their votes.
Yeah,
So
said like simply, they are being prevented from being a part of the current government system, and they're actually being blocked out because they're being accused as being fascists. There's lots of things that a fascist person or party does, but one of the definitions of being a fascist is silencing your opposition. So the party that's accusing the AfD of being fascist is actually being fascist themselves by
yeah,
completely silencing their opposition. And the irony and hypocrisy of this is mind-blowing from a third party, from the US looking at Germany right now. And I don't know how many Germans are listening to this, but it's actually quite scary to think that the ruling party is actually believing in what they're doing, silencing their opposition, believing that 20% of Germany, which was again the second most voted for party, should just not have a voice at all. That is a recipe for disaster in the long term.
there's also news that the Germany's domestic spy agency, the BFV, had slapped a label on them, and they put on this 1,000-page secret dossier that claimed that they were a right-wing extremist party, and that's the reason that they shouldn't be allowed to be in participating in government the way they typically would, like any other party would be able to participate in the government.
So you're telling me there's a party in Germany who's silencing their opposition and has a secret service, an SS secret service unit that is spying on their opposition and silencing them? I mean, come on, history rhyming here. Are they not looking in the mirror? So let's dive
Yeah,
into the economy there, because um, if we look at what's going on in Germany economically, there's some red lights that should be flashing in Germans' brains, but also globally. And then we're going to contrast it to another country, right?
exactly. But before we do that, I want to just share one last thing about the AfD, which is quite interesting, is that they don't fit the typical like German right wing extremist designation. They're actually, if there's a deep seated fear in Germany, it's that the Nazis will come back. The AfD actually is highly supportive of Israel, and they're getting slapped with this right wing designation as being anti Muslim, which is very different than, what everybody knows about the Nazis and their views on Jews and being anti Semitic. So, anyway, that's interesting. Germany, as we started to dive in, a lot of things are happening in Germany. And um, Cody did kind of a deep dive here into, all right, well, there's lots of chaos going on in the political system. Why is that? And so he kind of dove into the German economy, and there's some clues there about why things might be getting a little bit more chaotic on the ground. So why don't you dive in? Germany's economy has been mostly stagnant. Tell us a little bit about like what's going on the ground with their economy and what's been happening over the last 5 years.
So I'm going to read you a couple sentences from this EU report, and then we're going to throw up a lot of charts here. So if you're listening to this, you're going to have to bear with us. But if you're on YouTube, this will be fun because I love charts because it really paints a picture. So this report says Germany's most immediate problem is that its economic growth has stalled. The European Commission forecasts GDP growth of just 0.7% in 2025, making the slowest pace among EU nations. Since 2017, the German economy has grown by a mere 1.6%, far below the EU average of 9.5%. Structural weakness, such as high energy costs, low public investment, and an over reliance on exports, have entrenched stagnation. Now, I'm going to ad lib a little bit more because this is not what the report said, but they have had massive migration issues, which is what you just talked about. The AFD is being accused of being racist because there's been a massive immigration from Africa and the Middle East of Muslims coming in and significantly disrupting their social order. But they've also had a stagnation in their actual economy and risk taking, meaning entrepreneurs are being basically beat down by bureaucracy, and they're either being silenced or held back, or they're leaving altogether. They're going to other places, Luxembourg, the US, or Dubai, at places where they can really take their capital, risk it on ventures where they believe they'll have a better chance. So this first chart I think is really interesting. It's the past 3 years of GDP growth. It's like the chart's almost comical. It's like up, down, and the up is like 0.2 and the down is 0.3 or 0.4. The point is every single quarter for the past 3 years has been up and down between growth and contraction. And if you were to blend this line out, if there's a line chart here, we'll show this bar chart, it would just be it would be nothing. The economy is doing nothing. And then if we go back 10 years, the growth is almost exactly the same. So 10 years ago, since around 2016 to just before the pandemic, their growth was at less than 1% per year. And if you throw in inflation and all kinds of other economic statistics out there, you're basically looking at an economy that's not growing at all. And that's especially true when you compare it to its peers, because it's not just not growing itself, it's not growing compared to its peers. So it's almost going backwards. And then this line chart here, this is the third chart showing it's the blended growth here. You can see that it's basically stagnant since about 2016. There was a big dip because of COVID, but every country had that. So if you blend that line out, for the past decade, the country is doing nothing. And if you're a German looking at this, especially if you're on the younger side, thinking, I want to be in a place where my family is going to have a lot of success, where the economy is growing, where I have opportunity, this is extremely frustrating. And then the last chart I'll show here, the last chart here for this topic is a GDP growth, the annual percentage growth going back to about 1960. It's just on this downward trend, and it's most countries have that where you have a lot of growth. Obviously, Germany had a lot of growth after World War II. They were basically had to start over. So you had a lot of growth, and around 1960 till now, it's just been this slow downward slowing of the economy, and they're here where they are now with immigration problems, stagnation problems, lack of talent, lack of creativity, lack of risk taking. It could go on, and it's a pretty bleak picture. And I'll let you jump in here with what could come next, but it's pretty clear that the people are not happy on the ground there, especially the native Germans.
Yeah, and there's a kind of a split too within the society in terms of how people look at like average Germans, how they approach a couple of the main conflicts in our, you know, going on in the globe right now. There's Ukraine, and then there's what's going on in Israel and the Middle East. And it's not clear, just like it's not clear in the US, right? Like, while there may be an official government policy about how the US is handling what's happening in Ukraine and in the Middle East, if you ask the average American, there's very different views about what they think the government should do. And that's reflected as well in Germany. You've got, um, on the Israel side of things, you've got police officers who are being injured at anti-Israel demonstrations in German cities, and a lot of imported anti-Semitism is spreading throughout the society. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One, you've added mass migration from mostly Muslim countries to, I think of all the countries, Germany's in like the top 3 or 4 of the for volume of absorbing refugees
Refugees not from Ukraine, but from Muslims countries
from
primarily.
Muslim countries primarily. We did an episode previously about the difference between Denmark and Germany, and I think one of the things we referenced was, I believe, and we have to fact check this, that about 10% of the German population has been come in as a refugee or immigrated to Germany over the last like 5 to 10 years, which is a very large chunk. So you've got a split in society between, and again, this is also reflected in the fact that the AfD, which has been labeled a threat to Jews, is actually, the AfD is actually a very pro-Israel party. They support Israel. They're the strongest supporter of Israel in Germany, and they gained about 21% of the vote. So you're seeing this split between Germans who support Israel and Germans who are very anti-Israel. And then you get the same thing in Ukraine. And you've got a German policy that is continuing to ratchet up their support of Ukraine. Again, lots of things are happening this last week in terms of the US, Germany, the EU taking away some of the restrictions in terms of the weaponry that Ukraine can use and how far they can launch missiles from Western weapons into Russia. There was restrictions on how far they could do that. Now those are being removed. And the sitting party in Germany is very supportive and very pro-Ukraine.
And I
So there's
also
just a
want,
lot.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I want to mention just to take the other side of the argument, or the devil's advocate perspective of why the current ruling party wants to silence the AfD. I think Germans are so cautious and careful to not repeat what they're historically known for in World War II, which is persecuting the Jews. And I'm oversimplifying this, but generally speaking, Hitler came to power and blamed a lot of the financial and economic woes on the Jewish population, and that was an easy scapegoat demographic to blame. And I think the current party is afraid of the AfD doing that to the Muslims that have been coming.
Exactly.
And so that's pretty obvious, but I just want to state that out in the open, because if you look at it in simplistic terms as that's what they're afraid of, it makes sense on paper. But in practice, what is actually happening is you're actually setting aside an entire portion of the native German population, which is much larger than this immigrant mass that is getting ostracized, that's getting overtaxed, and that are ending up supporting this immigration mass, basically subsidizing them. And what you're going to have is a very angry and frustrated portion of this German population. So when next time an election comes around or some sort of social disorder comes around, what's going to happen? You're going to have a ton of pissed off native Germans, which is exactly what happened 100 years ago, just prior to World War II. And this fear of history repeating what the Germans are seeing themselves, it's almost ironic that the fear that they're trying to prevent is actually possibly creating the same situation, which they're most notorious for pursuing 100 years ago.
Exactly.
It's a scary situation.
Blocking rights, restricting people, restricting free speech, all in the name of stopping fascism, which to me, as a free speech podcast, it sounds kind of like fascism.
Yeah.
There's a great one of my favorite Norm Macdonald jokes. Norm Macdonald's one of my favorite comedians.
Rest in peace, Norm.
Rest in peace, Norm. But he's doing like a bit, I think it's for Saturday Night Live, or it's like one of the talk shows, and he's up there and he's like, lots of things are happening with North Korea, and he's over there firing rockets, and people are thinking that he's going to start some sort of a World War, 3. He's like, I got kind of a different opinion on that. Kind of a dark horse candidate for the next World War 3, and it's Germany. It's like they're 2 for 2. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff going on in Germany. It's very interesting, and all that's compressed by an economy that is not growing. So
Yeah, let's transition to the next
let's
country, but
transition
I
to
just want to
another. Go ahead.
I want to echo what you said because things run in threes. Are we really pointing the finger at Germany for starting World War III? But what you just said about Germany releasing this statement about saying, "Hey, all holds are off for how far into Russia Ukraine can launch their weaponry," and Germany made this announcement just a couple days ago. And this announcement also included this slipped through the cracks that Germany has supplied Ukraine with new weapons, which are not being disclosed, but just was alluded to, that is and going to enable the Ukrainians to have a significant further reach into Russia, but also much more powerful and precise ability to target certain things. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. That was announced just a couple days ago, and the German Chancellor Merz, he announced that, saying the Germany is okay with that, Italy's okay with that, France is okay with that, and the Americans are okay with that. Of course, that didn't make the U.S. Media much at all, but that was from the Germans themselves actually announcing that. So I just wanted to make sure that that is what's clear going on right now as of this week.
We want to transition to another country that was very much embroiled in World War II, and has a similar situation. So on the other side of the coin, there's Russia, right? And if you dive into Russia's economy, their GDP, like Germany, has pretty much flatlined except for the pandemic and the war period. So we're going to throw up a chart here that shows a little bit about what's going on in Russia and why we focus on this. Like, just to zoom out a little bit, when economies don't grow and when opportunity feels like it's slipping away, often it's followed with social disruption. Uh, Consistently, there's been, like, governments have solved these issues by starting wars, escalating wars. There's lots of ways that they typically, it's kind of the typical playbook. When things slow down, they look for other ways, other places to either distract or get growth from something else. So why don't you dive into what's going on in Russia with their GDP right now? And I know you dove in and did some research here. Give us kind of a breakdown of what's happening in Russia in 2025.
So that chart you just referenced, we'll throw it up here again. It shows the annual GDP growth rate in Russia, and we have a blended line here, and it's pretty similar to Germany, which is the growth rate's pretty dang low, and it's back to about 2016 levels. You have this big volatile time during the pandemic, so right during 2020 into 2021, so a big dip, big rebound, and then it dipped a lot after kind of the pandemic recovery, but then the war started, right? Russia invaded Ukraine, and then Russia's economy boosted up again, but they're falling. And that's the most important thing to know about right now. The Russian economy, according to statistics we have, or the world has available to itself, is starting to slow down more. So this war machine that they have been ramping up for their special military operation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is seeming to not really accelerate their economy as maybe internally they had hoped. And this article just came out. This is actually from TASS, which is a Russian state-sponsored news agency. It says Russia's GDP growth rate slows to 2% in Q1 of 2025, and they expect the growth rate for the rest of the year to slow down even further. So to dive into that a little bit, it's important to understand what's actually happening right now in Russia. So during the war and during the pandemic, Russia was actually selling a lot of oil to China and to India. Well, Trump just a couple of days ago just announced that if any country receives oil from Russia directly, they're going to be subject to 500% tariffs in other parts of those economies. So China would be subject to 500% tariffs if they receive oil directly from Russia. Well, this is kind of breaking news over the past couple of weeks. China's like, okay, we're not going to get Russian oil. They just don't want to get mixed into that. Now, a side note, what might be happening is Iranian and Russian oil may be going through Malaysia and then going to China. So there's kind of this workaround. But the point is that it's definitely hitting Russia right now, which is countries are trying to distance themselves from Russia because they're realizing the majority of the world is saying, Russia, you're a big bad boy, you're going to get disciplined. And most countries are like, you know what? There's probably not a battle I want to get entangled in right now. Let's just step away. So Russia's actual GDP growth, but also just the revenue being generated by the government there is going to slow down even more because there are less countries willing to do trade with Russia, and most people know Russia is a huge commodity rich country. They have a ton of oil, gas, all of that. So if less countries are willing to do business with them, obviously revenues within Russia are going to fall. We'll throw up another chart here, which is it shows basically the GDP for Russia blended out with this line again, and it just articulates that hey, they're in trouble. It's dropping off here as we head into the latter half of 2025, and it's likely to contract even more. And I think when that happens, Russia's going to start to get desperate. What are they going to do? I don't know, but it's clearly um, it makes sense why Putin is not willing to go to the negotiating table right now with Zelensky, with Putin. He's got an internal problem right now, and he may need to ramp up his war machine again in order to jumpstart his economy.
How when you look at the Russian ruble, right? So we've got a chart that shows the U.S. dollar, Russian ruble, and the strength of the Russian ruble versus the U.S. dollar. How does that impact, in your opinion, the like some of the trade that they're doing?
It's a great question because now that we're diving into currencies, it's a little bit different than GDP, right? Because the US has its own problem with the US dollar, and we can dive into that a little bit later in the episode. But the ruble is actually strengthening right now, which is kind of bizarre. And maybe it's because some traders believe there's going to be a somewhat of a um, there's a horizon with this conflict with Ukraine. So maybe some traders believe, hey, there's some glimmer of hope that this war is going to come to an end. And once we have access to Russian equities and Russian investments, it's going to be very attractive. So there's maybe some front running here, which is in turn increasing the value or the power of the ruble relative to the US dollar. The US dollar has the opposite problem, which it's weakening right now. And there's, again, problems within the US. You know, a couple of statistics I didn't mention about the economic growth within Russia over the past from 2022 to 2024. Their GDP grew 5.6%. Their budget deficit was only 1.7% of GDP. Put that in contrast with the US, which were almost at 8%. And the ruble, as we just said, has strengthened. So my point is that their economy has actually done pretty well the past couple of years. And now that things are coming to an end here, maybe uh, we're seeing their economy slow down.
And the reason it seems flat over a like 10-year period is because it's over a 10-year period's pretty flat, but it's done well since 2022, which is when the war kicked off.
Exactly.
Um, so just to kind of sum things up, right? We're looking at two of these larger powers in Europe, and both of them are having issues with their economy, and both of them also have very like just like the US, there's a lot of volatility in terms of differing factions with inside the country with different views on how things should be played. And typically when the economy is growing fast and things are going well, social conflicts and conflicts inside the domestic issues are not as prominent as when the economy starts to contract, right? When people start to feel worse, things get more volatile. So our whole point with this episode is we're just seeing more volatility in Germany and in Russia. And these are two of the biggest players in Europe. And Germany's kind of taking over the role and the lead that the US was taking during the Biden administration. They're starting to be the leaders in supporting Ukraine. They're starting to ramp up their war machine. They're starting to put pressure on other countries in the EU to take a harder line stance against Russia. And some countries are doing it on their own, but again, they're kind of stepping up here and replacing the US and taking leadership. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? That's just what's happening. And there are second order consequences that come from that.
So yeah, let's do a couple of the second order consequences of the local countries around Germany, just to put this out there. Poland, we talked about in the last couple episodes ago, is the number one performing economy um, in the world. They've
This
boomed.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and part of that boom has been their investment in infrastructure and defense. And if you go look at the statistics of the actual armament that Poland is purchasing, these are tanks, these are vehicles, this is actual guns, bullets, etc. It's mind-boggling. And many of these purchases they've made are not like, hey, we bought some stuff off the shelf and they're being delivered right now. These are supposed to be delivered past 2030. So we're talking about billions and billions of dollars to purchase war materials. Are they going to be put to use? Of course, we hope not. But this is dang similar to what has happened in the past. And if you contrast that with the political and social situation in Poland as well, they have the same situation. It's not as similar with the Muslim part, but they have a huge amount of Ukrainian immigrants coming into Poland. The Poles are less probably frustrated with the Ukrainians coming in because a little bit more of a similar social beliefs, but nonetheless, it still disrupts what's going on. It still disrupts their country, and it certainly changes the flow of what's going on there. Another country that's important to mention is Slovakia. Germany has been making these more or less announcements for the EU about how they're going to position themselves for in defense of Ukraine, and Slovakia has said, "Yo, like, wait, hang on, we're not a part of this. Like, do not be saying that we're gonna do all these aggressive things to Russia, because that's clearly poking the bear, literally." And Slovakia is kind of throwing up their hands and saying, like, "Do not say that. We're not part of. We don't agree with that. We're part of this European bloc, but we do not agree with you trying to ratchet up this narrative." And so you kind of have these countries within Europe disagreeing with Germany taking the lead, but their bottom line is Germany is still the economic, even though they're slow, they're still the economic powerhouse of the region, and they are going to dictate what happens with the support of Ukraine. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this is something I don't think most people want to even believe is happening or just want to dismiss it. One, because most people probably don't know their history very well, but two, because it's an uncomfortable thing to identify. We're looking at all these data points. We're looking at this current events that rhyme almost exactly with history, and it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that there could be a major scale war between Europe and Russia right now. Who knows how the other countries are going to get involved? But the way things are playing out, it's almost exactly how the preceding to World War II rolled out. So it's a pretty scary situation.
And I personally think that it's unlikely to escalate to the same level because we just are at a different point in nuclear arsenals deter direct one-on-one conflict. But it goes back to this kind of the challenge that you're seeing in ending the conflict in Ukraine. I think that the Trump administration was hoping, they definitely were hoping that they'd be able to wrap this thing up, end the conflict in Ukraine by, this is being recorded in end of May, early June. And I'm sure they were hoping to be able to wrap this conflict up, end it, make a peace deal, but it hasn't happened. And what what I'm seeing is both economies not doing well, more unrest domestically. That's probably not making the conditions to wrap this thing up quickly and easily. It's not helping that process. And then you also look at kind of skating where the puck is going, right? And if Poland and all these countries are massively investing in defense, what does that mean, right? And we went through all these fast growing economies. So many of them were in Europe. So many of them were driven by the defense spending and massive investment programs of these countries. It's interesting. Like, do you see that as an investor? Do you see that continuing? It feels like it, right?
It does, but something's got to break here. And I think one of the things that is going to help break it is domestic problems within the United States, specifically economically. When I say break it, I don't mean like something immediate is going to happen, like some catalyst to
Just shift
war
it.
shift it significantly,
Yeah.
because the U.S., in my personal opinion, over the past 2 weeks, my position has changed about where we're going, especially as it pertains to inflation. And I alluded to this earlier. I think we're going to have issues with inflation. Seeing the 10-year go up to about 5%. I think we're going to get a lot higher than that. I think that it's again, one of those unthinkable things. There's no way interest rates could go up again. I think that's where we're headed, and the reason why is because the last bond auction in the U.S. was a disaster. Nobody wants U.S. Treasuries because the U.S. is upside down on its finances. We just passed this big, beautiful bill or whatever the hell it's called. It did
Did it
nothing.
get passed?
Did it get passed? I don't even know if it got passed. It's still in the
No, I don't think it's got passed yet.
okay. It's still in the quagmire
Passed the House.
of the swamp. But whether it gets passed or doesn't get passed, it doesn't even matter because
It just what happens is
it
that
didn't fix
dictates that
anything.
we're on the wrong
Yes,
path.
there's without like immediate U-turn in the financial situation for the U.S. We're going to have some major problems, and the first canary in the coal mine are these bonds that are trading, and they're going up. And if the U.S. has this issue where we have to refocus on what's happening domestically, we're going to stop supporting a lot of what is going on in Ukraine and what's going on with Germany and Ukraine and Russia, and they're going to deal with it on their own. And the track, or the at least the trajectory that they're on right now, is not looking good at all. And there's one last article. We'll talk about some investment opportunities in just a moment, but one last article that was put out by RT, which is Russian television. So, of course, this is propaganda, but
Russia Today.
Russia Today. This is literally the article says Germany risks becoming a target for Russia for the first time since Hitler. So they're openly saying it now. This is just the propaganda going on within Russia, and of course within Germany and within the US. Everyone's got their own narrative, but the Russians are openly saying it now. Like, we have a situation that's similar to what happened in World War II. They're mentioning Hitler's names in actual articles that are being distributed to the Russian people, and it's very clear of at least where the path is leading to in the very, very short term. But I want to transition to investment ideas, because I think we've kicked this horse or
Yeah.
dog or enough.
Beat the horse.
Yeah.
Lots of volatility happening.
Yeah. Lots of volatility.
So investment ideas. What's your top investment idea?
Okay, I just want to mention first. So I think volatility, not only historically is going to come back, meaning cyclically volatility is going to come back, but now that we're looking at all these events, it's pretty clear that like we're going to have a lot more volatile times. So the biggest opportunities for people right now is not going to be indexing in funds and like passive investing in ETFs. It's going to be stock picking. I think stock picking is going to come back, and I think some hedge funds are absolutely going to crush it over the coming years. So I think the number one investment advice, or I shouldn't say advice, but number one investment theme, I think, is getting away from the normal SPY and put it in a Vanguard fund. I think there's going to be outperformance by stock picking. That's for sure coming back. What else? You waiting for my next one? Next big one that I think is going to be huge. So we have the Mag 7, which is clearly cooling off. The new Mag 7, we've mentioned this before, is the defense industry in Europe. Despite all the financial problems that are going on in Europe, the reality is that these countries are going to print like crazy. They're going to force all kinds of fiat currency to come out of thin air to finance whatever they need to do. A lot of it's going to be actual infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. within Europe, but a lot of it's going to be for defense. So I think you're going to see a lot of publicly traded defense companies. I don't, and of course, airplanes, guns, bombs, that's very obvious, but there's a lot of supporting industries for the military and for infrastructure, like steel, metals, mining, energy, all that type of stuff, which is historically pretty low right now relative to the valuation of tech stocks. I think those are going to rip, and I actually think that private companies, startups, are actually going to have a heyday in the coming years in Europe. And Europe has been a dog for the past several, maybe almost decade in the tech sector. There's been a couple companies here and there, but more or less there's been nothing really exciting coming out of Europe. So I think a lot of homegrown startups within Germany, within Poland, within Italy, France, Spain, all of these countries, I think the governments are going to be supporting a lot of these startup private companies that are going to do very, very well. And if investors can position themselves right now, now's the time, because the reality is interest rates are high. So people don't want to risk their capital. So people who are willing to take a risk on really unique companies solving big, big problems for these local European countries, I think there's going to be some huge upside for investors there. The third one, I got some more, but I'll end it here for right now and let you chime in. The third one I think is US-based companies that are receiving contracts, purchase orders or some sort of service type long-term contracts to support what's going on in Europe. The reality is the U.S. is still the tech leader. We're also a leader in war. Like it or not, the U.S. is really good at war. We've been deployed around the world for the past basically century. We're really good at logistics. We're really good at weapons. We're really good at getting things moved around the globe. And I think that the U.S. is going to receive a lot of the I'm using air quotes on this, the orders, the Amazon orders, people pressing buy now that are in Europe to support whatever is going to be happening next in Europe. So for investors looking for opportunity, I think all three of those areas are going to be booming over the next coming years.
Yeah, I think right now, my perspective is that this is the biggest opportunity for the Trump administration to have success is to somehow pull a rabbit out of the hat and negotiate and make a peace deal in both the Middle East and Ukraine. If that can happen, we can avert catastrophe. That'll be the biggest, best, beautiful deal made. You can look at this big, beautiful bill, and it's pretty ugly. But if you can make some big, beautiful deals in the Middle East and Ukraine and avert some of this stuff, I think that'd be the best possible thing we could do. Because otherwise, again, a lot of this just comes back to volatility. You talked about inflation. You talked about oil as also something that could rise.
Yeah, so the last
Why,
two
why would
investment
oil
things.
rise?
So just talk about inflation real quick. I already talked
Yeah.
about the bond sale in the U.S. basically being a disaster. No one wants the bonds. Yields rise because that's what happens in a market where you don't have enough buyers and somebody's trying to sell something. I think inflation is going to start to run hotter in the U.S. and I actually think it's going to start running hotter in Europe as well. And that's because as we have a possible economic boom because of wartime preparation or at least
And
conflict
people printing
preparation.
money.
Yes,
Government's printing money.
government's printing money, but also people making more money. When people make more money, they sometimes spend it a lot more, and that often can rise inflation. Of course, there's an equilibrium that can happen there if the central bank tries to control it. But when the central bank throughout Europe is mismanaging money, Germany, every single European country is operating at a deficit, almost every single one. You're going to have inflation go up and up and up because people are trusting the currency less. And that's exactly what's happened in the US. We're running at about an 8% deficit for this year. A deficit. That's not taking into account interest rates. That's not even taking into account our past deficit. We're spending 8% per year right now, more than we're taking in. And people are just going to trust currency less and less. So as inflation runs hotter, commodities like oil are going to they're going to get compressed like a spring. So oil is around $50 a barrel right now, relatively kind of cheap. I mean, compared to where we saw around 2008 and what was it like $120 a barrel or something like
Yeah.
that. I think oil is a pretty interesting bet right now. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. I think there's a huge narrative that
It's not AI.
yeah,
It's
well,
not Bitcoin.
yeah. I think there's a huge narrative that the U.S. is going to drill, baby, drill. I think there's a huge narrative that oil is going to just flood the markets, which it might for a little while. And that's one of the reasons why oil is so cheap right now. But if you want to look at a risk reward opportunity, oil is pretty interesting. Energy is something that's not going away. And if you have patience, I think it's a pretty safe play to look at some companies that are really undervalued right now, have really strong books, and they are supplying what the world needs. Yeah, and the commodities. So I mentioned that in the last episode.
Yeah.
The commodities, in comparison to equities right now, are at a historical opposition in valuation. And regardless of the actual intrinsic value of commodity, like companies producing, mining, refining, etc., their valuations relative to tech is obscene. It's the complete opposite. So anybody expecting companies like Apple or Palantir or these high flying companies to bank in on the AI, trend, which by the way, I'm super bullish AI, but the problem is the valuations based on what they think is going to happen
Are massive.
insinuates that we're going to have multi-trillion dollar companies in a matter of like a couple of years. It's not going to happen. I'm predicting that now. It's not
Making the
gonna
call
happen.
now.
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
going to happen first is these commodities companies that provide the building blocks for what the world needs. They're going to come up in valuation before those companies blow out earnings over the next 5 years. I said what I
Su-
said.
Yep. Super interesting episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, I would love to hear from you. And if you got different takes, hit us up on Twitter. And if you like this episode, please subscribe on YouTube, share it with a friend. Thank you for listening. We will be back next week with a new episode. Have a good one.